was actually the time I did that the first time that you just saw. I went back there and went, what have I done? What came over me? Who am I?
Those weren't lines from a script. That was Sally Field alone in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror, unraveling. She'd just finished a scene that demanded everything from her, but instead of applause, she was met with silence, dismissal, and a cold stare from the man who had spent weeks tearing her down behind the scenes. She was 35, acclaimed, decorated, already a two-time Oscar winner. But in that moment, she felt like nothing, invisible, unseen, erased by the very people who had once called her brilliant. Hollywood loves to put women on pedestals, but it loves to knock them down even more. Now, at 78 years old, Sally Field has finally broken her silence. No more secrets, no more protecting powerful men. She's naming names, 6 of them. These aren't petty feuds or tabloid spats. These are the wounds that shaped her, the betrayals she carried quietly, the co-stars who mistook cruelty for charisma, manipulation for mentorship, and silence for submission. This is not gossip. This is the truth from a woman who has nothing left to prove and everything left to say. To the public, they were electric. Sally Field and Burt Reynolds were the golden couple of the late 1970s. On screen, they lit up the box office in Smokey and the Bandit. Off-screen, their chemistry made headlines. They laughed, they flirted, they looked unstoppable. But behind the scenes, Sally lived a very different reality. In her memoir, In Pieces, she finally revealed the truth. Burt Reynolds was not her partner. He was her controller. He dismissed her ideas, interrupted her thoughts, and constantly undermined her confidence, both as a woman and an actress. He mocked her looks. He questioned her intelligence. And while the world saw a man in love, Sally saw a man who used love as leverage. She wrote, "He wanted me next to him, smiling, silent. He wouldn't let her speak freely, even in private. Every conversation turned into a battlefield where her voice was the first casualty. Worse, he manipulated her emotions. One moment he'd be affectionate, the next distant and punishing. He knew how to keep her uncertain, off balance, always reaching for approval she never truly received. I was there," she said, "but not me, not the full me." She gave him years of her life, hoping he'd see her for who she really was. But in the end, Sally realized the man the public adored was a stranger to her, and loving him almost cost her the most important thing of all, herself. On the set of Backroads, Sally came in with hope. The role was gritty, complex, a character she could sink her teeth into. She expected collaboration. But what she got instead was ice. From the first day, Tommy Lee Jones made it clear he wasn't interested in connection, not with her, not with anyone. He wouldn't look her in the eye, wouldn't talk between takes, wouldn't answer when she reached out with questions or insights. He came in, hit his marks, spoke his lines, and left. Cold, mechanical, detached. And while some might chalk it up to method acting or intense focus, Sally knew better. She could feel it in the air. This wasn't professionalism, it was personal. She tried to break the ice. She told jokes, asked about character backstories, suggested ways to build emotional tension in their scenes. Nothing worked. "He treated me like I didn't belong," she later said, "like I hadn't earned the right to stand on the same set." Critics slammed Backroads for its lack of chemistry, but what they didn't see was the emotional warfare behind the camera. Sally wasn't just acting opposite a distant character, she was acting opposite a wall. When asked years later if she'd ever work with him again, she didn't answer directly, but the chill in her voice said enough. During the filming of Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole, Sally Field found herself face to face with chaos, not the creative kind. The kind that destroys a set. His name was Robert Blake. Known for his volatile behavior and unpredictable mood swings, Blake treated the set like a battleground, and everyone else as collateral damage. Sally recalled how he'd change lines mid-scene, go off script, undermine her timing, sabotage emotional moments by throwing in improvised chaos, what he called spontaneity. Sally saw for what it was, sabotage disguised as genius. And it didn't stop at her. Blake berated crew members, yelled at technicians, stormed off set over minor disagreements. One day he was focused. The next, he was an explosion waiting to happen. Sally, always the peacemaker, tried to hold the production together, but the tension became unbearable. The film was shelved before it ever made it to air. It wasn't just a failed project, it was a personal trauma. There are actors who act, she later said, and actors who make everyone else feel small so they can feel big. She walked away with one promise to herself: never again. To millions of fans, Steel Magnolias was a cinematic treasure, a rare film led by powerhouse women, each with their own charisma, fire, and grace. But what the audience never saw was the emotional toll it took on Sally Field, and the silent war she fought every single day with Shirley MacLaine. From the outside, they were professionals, two seasoned actresses, two award winners. But when cameras weren't rolling, the air between them was thick with quiet hostility. It began with subtle things: Shirley's long monologues during table reads, her eye rolls whenever Sally offered ideas, her insistence on adjusting scenes on the fly. She interrupted the director more than once, claiming she knew better, that her instincts had never failed her. It was clear Shirley didn't want collaboration. She wanted command. Sally, ever the professional, tried to rise above. She came to set prepared. She studied every beat of emotion, every nuance. Her character, Malin, was one of the most emotionally demanding she'd ever played, a mother watching her daughter's life slip away. It required depth, pain, absolute honesty. But Shirley? She treated every moment like an improv comedy skit. She ad-libbed during the most painful monologues. She injected sarcasm into scenes meant to break hearts. And it wasn't just disruptive, it was cruel. One critical scene required Sally to deliver a raw, emotionally exposed outburst. It was the climax of her character's grief. Every woman in the cast circled around her in the funeral scene. It was meant to be sacred. They had rehearsed. They had prepared. But when the camera rolled, Shirley changed the rhythm. She added snide comments under her breath, threw off the emotional pacing, and turned tears into awkward tension. 17 takes. That's how long it took. Not because Sally faltered, but because Shirley wouldn't stop hijacking the moment. And every time the director called cut, Sally's heartbreak grew deeper, not just as an actress trying to nail a performance, but as a woman who felt deeply disrespected. The rest of the cast saw it. Julia Roberts tried to smooth things over. Dolly Parton gently joked between takes, but no one could stop Shirley. She was on a mission to dominate. Years later, when asked about Steel Magnolias, Sally never badmouthed her. She simply said, "Shirley brought a cloud with her." But behind those words was a deeper truth. That cloud wasn't just ego, it was suffocating. Sally had walked into that film hoping for unity, sisterhood, magic. But instead, she walked away with bruises no one could see. Not physical ones, emotional ones. The kind that don't heal with time, only with truth. When Sally Field signed on for Kiss Me Goodbye, she thought she was stepping into something light, a quirky romantic comedy filled with warmth, laughter, and just a touch of fantasy. It was supposed to be a relief after heavier, emotionally demanding roles, but instead, she found herself trapped in a production that quickly turned toxic, and at the center of it was James Woods. At first, he seemed intense, focused, sharp, maybe a little eccentric, but within days, Sally realized this wasn't just creative intensity, this was manipulation. James Woods brought with him an energy that wasn't playful, it was predatory. On set, he constantly challenged the script. He'd show up having rewritten his own lines, and sometimes Sally's, without consulting anyone. He would corner the director between takes, arguing for different tones, new blocking, changed dialogue. And it wasn't to improve the film. It was to assert control. Sally, a deeply intuitive actress, thrived on emotional honesty and mutual trust. She gave generously to her co-stars, feeding off their energy, building something authentic in each scene. But with Woods, there was no give, only take. He questioned her performance mid-scene, interrupted rehearsals with philosophical debates, and even made snide comments about her choices, not behind closed doors, but right in front of the crew. At first, Sally tried to engage him. She asked questions, tried to find common ground. But Woods didn't want collaboration. He wanted power, and slowly she realized what he was doing. Gaslighting. Off camera, he'd lower his voice and say things like, "I don't think your heart's really in this, Sally," or "Maybe this character's just too thin for someone like you." Always with a smile, always under the radar. But the effect was devastating. It wasn't just disrespect, it was psychological warfare. One day, after a particularly rough shoot, he told her she was phoning it in, that she wasn't connecting with the material. But Sally knew better. She'd poured herself into the scene. It was his dismissiveness that had shattered the moment. "I wasn't tired because of the role," she later said. "I was tired because I had to keep defending my soul." Sally walked away from that film, not just disillusioned, but changed. She realized that some actors don't just take up space, they erase yours. And from that moment forward, she vowed, never again would she shrink herself to make a man feel bigger. You wouldn't expect to find Dustin Hoffman on this list. A respected icon, an actor's actor. A name spoken in the same breath as De Niro and Pacino. But to Sally Field, he was a silent wound. They never shared the screen. No blockbuster, no award-winning drama. But they almost did. It was a quiet audition for a film that never got made. A forgotten project in the early 80s. But what happened in that audition room haunted Sally for years. She walked in ready. This was her moment. A promising role with major backing. She was fresh off a string of wins, and she believed she had finally earned her place in the upper tier of Hollywood. But before she even opened her mouth, Dustin Hoffman had already made his judgment. He paced the room like he owned it, cracking jokes with producers, dismissing the script aloud. And when it came time for the chemistry read, he interrupted Sally mid-line. Not once, not twice, but over and over. He questioned her interpretation, mocked her delivery. At one point, he stopped her cold and said, "That's not how she'd say it. Try again." In front of the producers, the director, the assistants, he humiliated her. Sally did her best to maintain composure. She smiled, she nodded, but inside, she was unraveling. It didn't feel like an audition. It felt like an ambush. Later that week, she got the news. She didn't get the role. But worse, she heard from a mutual friend that Hoffman had bragged about sabotaging the audition. He reportedly said, "There was no chemistry, and I made sure of it." For Sally, that was the dagger. Not the rejection, the cruelty, the deliberate decision to tear her down so he could rise a little higher. She spent weeks questioning herself. Had she misread the room? Had she fumbled her chance? But eventually, clarity returned. The problem wasn't her, it was him. It was the same pattern she had seen before. A powerful man using his influence to diminish a woman he didn't respect. Years later, she would call it one of the most demeaning moments of my career. But she also called it a turning point. From that moment on, she stopped chasing approval from men like Hoffman. She stopped auditioning for validation. She started demanding respect, not requesting it.
Hollywood gave Sally Field the spotlight, but it also gave her wounds. For decades, she protected reputations, stayed silent, took the high road, but silence comes at a cost. At 78, she finally said, "Enough." She didn't name these 6 men for revenge. She named them for every woman who's been sidelined, dismissed, or silenced. For every actress told to lighten up. For every artist made to feel small in the presence of great men. They may have tried to break her, but they failed. Because Sally Field, she's not just a survivor, she's a legend. If you found this story powerful, emotional, or eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Which name shocked you the most? Should more women in Hollywood speak out like Sally did? Use your voice. Sally did, and it changed everything.